Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Carrie Marsh, and I'm the director of the Clark Historical Library. The Clark Speaker Series is one of our signature programs, and we're very grateful to have you here this evening. So we'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging that we are here on the beautiful lands maintained for generations by the Anishinaabe people, the indigenous inhabitants of Michigan. We acknowledge their stewardship and our contemporary partnership with our neighbors and partners, the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe. So I have some housekeeping. Please mute or turn off your cell phones. This event is being recorded, and the recording will be available for later viewing on campus via CMU's Chipcast. By your presence here, you agree that we can put this recorded event online. Because we're recording, we'll have a microphone for you to use during the Q&A. And if you raise your hand, I'll pass you a microphone to use to ask your question. So we're having a reception in the Clark after this evening's presentation with our esteemed speaker, and you are all invited, and I hope you all will join us. So I'm so very pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Fred Johnson III. Dr. Johnson is a renowned scholar of 19th century United States history, in particular the history of the Black experience in America. And he's the Guy Vander Jagt Professor of History at Hope College. He has a bachelor's degree from Bowie State College, a master's and PhD from Kent State University, and in 2015 earned a master's of divinity degree from Western Theological Seminary. As a scholar, Dr. Johnson has produced a wide range of research. He's published several books ranging from biography to fiction and research articles in scholarly journals, as well as newspaper and magazine articles. In 2004, he produced a documentary film titled The Ku Klux Klan in Michigan, The Klan of Reconstruction. He entered politics when he ran for a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives in 2008 and 2010. And prior to his career in higher ed, Dr. Johnson served in the United States Marine Corps and in the Marine Reserves. Dr. Johnson is also an award-winning public speaker, a member both of the Michigan chapter of the National Speakers Association, and since 2004, a member of Toastmasters. He took second place at the Toastmasters World Series of Public Speaking in 2017 and in 2018. And in his copious free time, Dr. Johnson serves as a member of the Clark Historical Library Board of Governors. So in his talk this evening, entitled Tolerating the Enemy Within, the Normalization of Mob Violence, he'll share examples of when, over the course of American history, different groups have been essentially abandoned in times of social and civil difficulty, as legislators, law enforcement, and others, symbolizing the guardrails of democracy, have either looked the other way or worse, contributed to the problem. So it's my pleasure, and please join me in welcoming Dr. Fred Johnson.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Tolerating the enemy within, the normalization of mob violence. Thanks, Carrie, for that great introduction. Let's go ahead and get into this. This is an interesting topic for a lot of users, not least of which our current environment, politically, socially, culturally, across the board. Let's start right here, January 6, 2021. You had to have been purposely under a rock that day to not see what was going on in the Capitol. Something happened that day that some people call an insurrection, but something else happened that day that had never happened even during the Civil War. During the Civil War, 4 years of civil warfare, the Confederate flag never made it into Washington, D.C. It certainly never made it inside the Capitol. General Jubal Anderson Early got within 7 miles of Washington before he was thrown back. So the Capitol was harassed several times during the Civil War, but never actually made it to Washington. 2021 broke that streak, made that happen. So that flag symbolizing treason, slavery, oppression, and a whole bunch of other adjectives that have very little to do with democracy, made inside the House of Democracy, the nation's capital. As I began thinking about this, putting this together for another occasion, I asked myself several questions. First of all, how did we get here? What does it mean that we're here? Who are we as a country? We say we're a nation that is a constitutional democratic republic that values rule of law. That means no one above the law, everyone standing equal before the law. That we believe in a constitution and civil liberties. We believe in liberal democracy, not liberal the way people are throwing around the word today, but in a nation where people have the freedom to, as Franklin Delano Roosevelt put it in his 4 freedom speeches in 1941, the freedom of worship, the freedom of speech, freedom from fear, and freedom from want. That kind of liberality. And in answering all those questions, or more specifically, how we answer those questions, will provide us a pathway to the future that has a very, very significant warning in it. First, how do we get here? To understand how we got here, you got to go back to the very beginning, which means 1787. If you go back in time to 1787, you will, of course, find the Constitution and the preamble, which begins with "We the people of the United States in order to serve a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility." That preamble, besides just being a preamble, is an articulation of everything that the founding fathers said. We want a more perfect union. They were men who were realistic enough to know that perfection on this side of life is never going to be achieved. So perfection is not going to be weak, but more perfection, more daily, that can be done. You can work on that. We want to establish justice. Why? Because before we didn't have that. We want to ensure domestic tranquility. Why? Because before we didn't have that. We want to provide for the common good. Why? Because we didn't have that before. In other words, all the stuff we didn't have before, we want that as a headline for what's going to be in this Constitution. And it's all great stuff that they want. Except you have to ask one question. In 1787, who's we? In 1787, we does not include women. In 1787, we does not include Native Americans. In 1787, we does not include poor white men. In 1787, we does not include black people, to be sure. So it turns out that in 1787, when people say "we the people," they're talking about a very narrow slice of society. There's got more people out of we than inside of we. You're trying to figure out how does mob violence get normalized. Well, mob violence is a function of law, or more specifically, lack of law, or what the law says is the culture. And in 1787, part of the culture of 1787, as a result of necessary compromises that had to be made and putting the Constitution together, was that at the Constitutional Convention, there were, of course, people there who owned slaves. The convention almost collapsed several times because slaveholders said, look, either make a compromise with us on our property or we're going to walk. You can't have a country coming together in the Constitution if half the participants are going to leave the convention. Sadly, the convention did not come together to abolish slavery, but to establish a government, which was their leading priority. And the main compromises were within 3 different spaces. Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3, Article 1, Section 9, Paragraph 1, and Article 4, Section 2, Paragraph 3. I have for us examples from Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3, what they call the Three-Fifths Compromise. And in that language, they were arguing about, well, what kind of legislature are we going to have? Bicameral, unicameral, 1 house, 2 house? They decided upon 2 houses. One which would be based on representation, House of Representatives. Wonderful. Based on representation. The upper house, the Senate, every state will get 2 senators, irrespective of the size. Connecticut will have the same number of senators as New York. Fine. That's kind of simple. But what about the House? You want representation based on numbers, population? That's wonderful. How are you going to get that? So they said, we want to get that number. Representatives shall be a portion that is divided among the several states, which may be included within this union, according to their numbers. Okay, according to the numbers. What's the formula? Which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years. And yes, what that means is indentured servitude. So what they're telling us is that in 1787, although we fought a revolution from 1775 to 1783, indentured servitude was still a thing in North America. So whole free persons, plus indentured servants, excluding Indians not taxed, the rallying cry of the American Revolution was no taxation without representation. That if you're going to take my money, I expect a voice in government. If Native Americans are not going to have their money taken, guess what they're not going to have? A voice in government. We should not be at all surprised that Native Americans will spend the next century and a half being kicked across the continent. So the formula says, we want whole persons, plus those bound to service, for a term of years, minus Indians not taxed, plus 3/5 of all other persons. I wonder who they were talking about. You see, you cannot write this into the foundation that becomes the law of the land, the thing upon which American jurisprudence will be built. And I figured that at some point, this is not sustainable. You can't love liberty and embrace tyranny at the same time. And American chattel slavery was nothing if not tyranny on the most personal level. And then Article 1, Section 9, Paragraph 1, the Migration and Importation Clause. The migration and importation of such persons. The founding fathers, I truly admire them, and I'm not saying that facetiously or with my tongue in my cheek. They were truly a generation of really fantastic, well-educated, brilliant men who took their lives into their hands by fighting against the British, because if they had lost that revolution, the British had several methods of dealing with them: hanging or firing a squad. So they were really putting everything on the line, and they put everything on the line and they won. They got very, very fortunate. Their courage took them across the finish line. They were so educated, so aware, so practical, so wise, that their wisdom is what indicts them. They knew, and in the book Decision of Philadelphia, the authors point out that the founding fathers very often use phrases like, the eyes of the world are upon us. They knew they were being watched, because a Republican democracy in 1787 is the exception, not the norm, for world government around the world. So people are watching to see, is this thing going to work? They're watching us. We have to make this work. So therefore, they're not stupid enough to write the word slavery to this document. So they use a euphemistic phrase called such persons. The migration and importation of such persons as the Congress, as any of the states shall now existing state to property shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808. Wait, founding fathers. Let me make sure I'm understanding this correctly. Are you actually saying that thing called the transatlantic slave trade? We know people will migrate. They'll leave one state and move to another state. People graduate, they go someplace else to get a job. People are trying to flee violence in the country, so they'll leave from one country, go to. We know people will migrate on their own. What's this importation business? That's called human trafficking. Importation wasn't I thinking about people being imported legally. Never. So are you telling me, founding fathers, that you were saying that the Congress, which has not yet met under this document that you're drafting in Philadelphia in 1787, the ink is not yet dried yet. You're saying that before the first Congress can even convene, you're telling them that you shall not interfere with this migration importation business before 1808? And in addition to that, you're telling me that a tax or a duty may be imposed on such importation. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, founding fathers. Are you condemning your government to get involved in the transatlantic slave trade? That the recompense for it is $10 for each person, just import it? Because that's what it sure reads like. The Article 4, Section 2, Paragraph 3 dealt with the Fugitive Slave Clause, which they put into the Constitution, then they'll upgrade it in 1793 by passing for the legislation, because you can never have enough legislation for people that are refusing to stay free, stay slaves, and run away. So early on, the devil's bargain was made with tyranny and freedom. It's like standing there at the altar on your wedding day with both your betrothed, the person you want to marry, and the person you're going to cheat with. Probably not a good moment, or requires a different interpretation of marriage. This went on. And at some point, the unsustainable marriage had to give way, and it did, to a civil war. You know, it is comforting at least to know that most historians, not all, but most historians had finally landed on the fact that the Civil War was about slavery. States' rights was involved, government, westward movement, yes. Economic differences, yes. Sexualism, yes. All those other things were there, but the root cause was slavery. A 4-year fight. Think about that, folks. A 4-year fight. Fratricidal warfare, the world's first modern war on this continent over slavery. It must have been really important to them to kill nearly a million Americans. And they thought about it in a sustained fashion. And for most Southerners, they didn't really have a dog in the fight because they didn't own slaves. So what were they just doing? Well, on April 9, 1865, it all ended. When General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant in William McLean's living room at Appomattox Courthouse. There it was, and the Constitution was updated, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. But again, to just double back for a moment, if you think about that fight called the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln summed it up on November 19, 1863, when he was invited up to speak at the commemoration of a battlefield called Gettysburg. He said, 4 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And then you can almost envision him like he took just a deep breath, and then he said, now we are in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived or so dedicated can long endure. Now we are in not a civil war, now we are in a great civil war. He qualified it. Now we are in a great civil war, testing whether that concept, all men are created equal, testing whether that concept, that nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. In other words, it's November 19, 1863. We have just won the biggest battle of the Civil War. General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia will never be the threat that it has been before, but it's not over yet. I'm still not sure that this thing called American Republican Democracy is going to work, the president's saying. The jury's still out on this one. We got to fight till the end. Maybe it'll last, maybe it won't. Fortunately, it lasted. The Civil War ends in 1865, and in 1866, that is, if it ends on April 9, 1865, April 1865, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. 9 months later, 1866, in Pulaski, Tennessee, the Ku Klux Klan is founded. Now, the Ku Klux Klan is a terrorist organization. The fact that it's homegrown is irrelevant. They are terrorists. In her book, The Second Coming of the KKK, Linda Gordon put it this way. There were 4 iterations, that is, 4 phases of the Ku Klux Klan that first emerged in the South immediately after the Civil War. It was a terrorist group. And when I say terrorist, think Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, ISIS, that kind of terrorism. The terrorism you understand today, they practice as well. It's just, as I said, homegrown. The fact that it's homegrown does not make them any different or any special. They're all essentially murdering thugs. Their main activity was violence against African Americans. There were times lynched more than 4,000 black people, and they had one simple purpose: to maintain white supremacy and to prevent black people from being able to enjoy any of the rights of a citizen, specifically first-class citizenship. In 1896, with the Civil War fought, Reconstruction over, there's 1865, 1877, Reconstruction is a done deal. It's come, it's gone. 3 constitutional amendments, 13th, ending slavery, 14th, giving due process, equal protection of the law, dual citizenship, supposedly dealing with civil rights, the 15th Amendment giving only black men the right to vote, sadly just men, not women, not yet. But you think that if the Constitution has amendments to it, the Constitution that people genuflect to when you say the word, they just simply don't obey the law. They ignore it. So that in 1896, when Homer Plessy, on the right here, back in those days, they called him an octoroon. That means he was 1/8 black. How you know that in 1896? I don't know. But somehow they figured it out. They obsessed themselves with knowing that kind of stuff in 1896. So Homer Plessy rides on the white section of a train in Louisiana. Someone discovers that he's black, or he makes it well known. And then they throw him off the train, takes it to the Supreme Court. In the case of Plessy versus Ferguson, The Supreme Court says, well, you know, when we passed the 14th Amendment and dealt with all that civil rights stuff, when we said that people could be equal, we didn't mean that it would equal as in equal in all ways in every sector of society. They can be equal as long as the accommodations are equal, of equal stature, they can be legally separated. Hence the concept of separate but equal became the standard as stated and endorsed by the Supreme Court, and it became adopted throughout the entire South and frankly in the North too. There was one dissenting opinion. Chief Justice John Marshall Harlan said, the white race deems itself to be the dominant race in this country. And so it is. In prestige and achievements in education and wealth and in power. So I doubt not it will continue to be for all time. If it remains true to its great heritage and holds fast to the principles of constitutional liberty. But in the view of the Constitution, in the eye of the law, there is in this country no superior, dominant ruling class of citizens, or there shouldn't be. There's no caste here, or there shouldn't be. Or there is, but there shouldn't be. Our Constitution is colorblind, or it should be. And neither knows or tolerates classes among citizens. In respect of civil rights, all citizens are equal before the law. No one above the law, everyone equal before the law. The humblest is the peer of the most powerful. The law regards man and holds and takes no account of his surroundings or of his skin color when his civil rights, as guaranteed by the supreme law of the land, are involved. The arbitrary separation of persons, of citizens, on the basis of race, while they are on a public highway, translated to mean train, is a badge of servitude wholly inconsistent with the symbol of freedom and the equality before the law established by the Constitution. It cannot be justified upon any legal grounds. If evils will result from the commingling of two races upon public highways established for the benefit of all, they will infinitely less than those that will surely come from the state legislation regulating the enjoyment of civil rights upon the basis of race. We boast of the freedom enjoyed to our people, by our people, above all other peoples. But it is difficult to reconcile that boast with the state of the law, which practically puts the brand of servitude and degradation upon a large class of our fellow citizens, our equals before the law. The thin disguise of equal accommodations for passengers and railway coaches will not mislead anyone nor atone for the wrong done this day. So was the lone dissenting voice. By 1915, segregation was the law of the land. Separate but equal was the law of the land. And look, you can't have that kind of a social dynamic unless the greater part of the majority of the citizens is going along with it. Right? Laws are only as good as the enforcement mechanism behind them. So a law passed like that isn't enforced, is no longer a viable law. It was enforced by law enforcement and therefore politicians who passed laws to make sure that they were enforced. Then in 1950, along comes D. Deborah Griffith with a brand new technology called movie making and produces a film based on a book called The Klansman by Thomas Dixon. And look, Birth of a Nation on many levels is a fantastic piece of artwork from a historical point of view. As far as film history goes, it was revolutionizing. Some of you will remember when the first Star Wars came out in 1977. The moment you saw that thing come up on the screen, boom, and all the music came out, you knew that if you're a science fiction fan, whatever science fiction movies were up to that point had to be different from that point forward. Because Star Wars broke the mold. So did Avatar. D. Deborah Griffith made movies in a way, however movies were being made at that point, you got to do it differently now because he's raised the bar very high on camera angles, shots, shadowing, lighting, everything. It was just a very, very well done movie as far as movie making goes. But the story he told was completely devastating. A story of Reconstruction. Now this is 1915, meaning 50 years after the Civil War is over. He decides to tell the story of Reconstruction on screen, brand new technology. Think about all the people having hair on fire right now about AI. Okay, so new technology, they don't know yet the full potential, but they know it's going to be powerful. They can see that. Then he tells the story, this new powerful medium called movies. The story is of a black Civil War soldier named Gus. No, Gus in actuality is a white man in blackface named Walter Long. So, as one documentary put it, a black man couldn't even get a job playing a black man. So they got a white guy playing this guy in blackface. So Gus has some secret desires. Now the whole movie shows black soldiers in the South that are walking down sidewalks and pushing white people off the sidewalk and stuffing ballot boxes and you see, throwing their weight around. Look, we're black soldiers wearing the blue Union uniform. You can't tell us what to do. I'm not your slave no more. So on and so on and so on. And then there's this. 1915, Gus shares his feelings of love for the female star of the movie. Well, in 1915, this is the match in the lake of fire. Gus says that I'm in love with you and I want to marry you. She's horrified, takes off running. Gus chases her. And you can look at Gus's face, the only thing that's not that he doesn't have is a drool bucket. Gus literally needs to have her by any means, to have her by force, to be blunt about it, to rape her if necessary. She's appropriately horrified. Because, see, part of the ideology, part of the myth of the lost cause, that is, the Civil War was fought for a noble reason. Yes, we lost, but it's for a noble purpose of fighting for our homes and our values and our way of life. So yeah, we lost, but we were fighting for a good thing. They euphemized it. She runs up the hill saying, either leave me alone or I'm going to jump to my death. You'll never have me. Not the way you want. So Gus keeps coming after her. He's not giving up. Then finally, she says, all right, I told you to leave me alone. She jumps to her death. Well, in the movie, this person that jumped to her death, she's related to a Confederate officer. When he finds out that his relative has jumped to her death, he's, of course, is distraught. What are we going to do about this? These people are out of control. You understand? The story is telling us, the story in Birth of a Nation is telling a story that people already were being told and were primed to want to believe. So he's filling in the blanks with, visually, black people are out of control. And by the way, 1915, the Ku Klux Klan, they had won the culture war. Black folk weren't voting. They'd been pushed back into the shadows as far as first-class citizenship was concerned. But this story about black overreaching and being depraved and being aggressive and chasing after white women, this is what people were being told, and they were using it as a cause for violence. So the movie simply just filled in the blank and verified what people believed anyway. Then there it was on the screen, in movie houses across the nation. That when the movie ended, people stood up and gave standing ovations to it. They said it's the greatest piece of movie making they'd ever seen. Then they remembered. Somebody told them that black people are afraid of ghosts. What if, the ghosts of dead Confederate soldiers were rising from the ground to take their revenge upon these out-of-control characters? That's how you get revenge and reestablish order in society. So, in 1915, the Ku Klux Klan, which, as I mentioned, had won the culture war, the terrorism had worked. In 1915, when the movie showed, President Woodrow Wilson, because he's in office at this point. He's elected in 1912. By 1914, the World War I starts. So in 1915, the movie comes out. The world's at war. There's been a lot of immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. So Europeans, but the wrong kind of Europeans coming to America. And Woodrow Wilson says the following. Woodrow Wilson essentially has blood on his hands. He is, in the early part of the 20th century, he's a horrible, horrible, horrible civil rights record. He just has a terrible civil rights record. He said the white men were roused by a mere instinct of self-preservation until at last has sprung into existence a great Ku Klux Klan, a veritable empire of the South to protect the Southern country, the Southern country. Wilson also was the first president to have a movie shown in the White House. He praised the product. This former president of Princeton University, political scientist, highly educated man, saying, yes, this is exactly how the Civil War was fought. That year, when Birth of a Nation was shown, and the people greeted it with standing applause across the country, that same year, the Ku Klux Klan that was already dwindling found a new reason to rebirth itself at Stone Mountain, Georgia. So there at Stone Mountain, Georgia, we see this carving of Jefferson Davis in the front. General Robert Edward Lee second, and then Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson last. There, the modern day Ku Klux Klan, that's the one that you and I live with, was founded, was reborn. Five years later, in Central Texas, a black man named Lee Daniels, who was in jail, had been arrested for allegedly trying to impose himself upon a white woman. They put him in jail under suspicion. The townsfolk didn't like that, so they decided to take justice into their hands and lynch him. Listen, the story here is not Lee Daniels who's hanging from the tree. That's not the story. His life is done. His problems are over with. The real story are the people that are looking at you, not at the camera, and not looking worried a single bit. When I show my students this whole college, I tell them, here's what I want to know. I want to know what's going on in their society, in their world, at that time, in their culture, in their political environment, in their laws, in their minds, in their theology in churches. I want to know what's telling them it's okay to be standing beneath a very dead body that is the scene of a homicide, be looking to the eye of the camera, and not be worried about that. What do they know that I don't know? Because normally you'd be running from that, wouldn't you? Or should be. They're not. They're looking very comfortable. That says a lot about the time they live in, who they are, and who Lee Daniels was not. Fellow scholars, by the 1920s, I mean the full decade of the 1920s, the reborn Ku Klux Klan is staging marches down Pennsylvania Avenue. You wonder how mob violence is normalized? Well, let's look at what the picture's telling us. Because if I'm looking at this picture, and then this one, with the Capitol in the background, then this one, with the background of the Capitol again, it seems to me that a terrorist organization is marching outside the nation's capital down Pennsylvania Avenue. That's Washington, D.C., my nation's capital. Now, I'm going to make a wild guess here. To people inside that house, meaning the representatives and senators, if they know they're marching outside, do they know that there's a terrorist organization marching outside? And if they do, I'm wondering, are they saying anything about that, or are they okay with it? More than that, since the people inside that house are sent by constituents to go to that house to represent them, do they know that their representatives are okay with terrorists marching outside, or are they okay with it too? Because if you know what terrorists are marching outside the hall, the House of Democracy, and they're not passing any legislation about that to do anything with it, how are the terrorists going to ever find out that what they're doing is called terrorism? They're part of the culture. And the fact that they're marching down Pennsylvania Avenue, knowing that the folk on the inside know they're out there, that the people that are sick, the people to that house know they're out there, and they're probably marching in some of those marches. They're in Grand Rapids too. They're up near Muskegon. They're in Michigan. They're all over the state of Indiana. If people know that, how is it not normalized then? A terrorist organization that's marching outside of the Hall of Democracy. I'm no longer confused about how Lee Daniels was lynched and the law didn't do anything, because the people that should have been passing the law, protect Lee Daniels, they're okay with this. So Lee Daniels was killed by an act of terrorism, mob violence. This is the mob that could be controlled by the people inside that house, but they're okay with this, so therefore they're okay with Lee Daniels and the way he died as well. And at some point, when the terrorists are carrying an American flag, when you go home tonight, get on YouTube and call out something called Night at the Garden. Night at the Garden. Night at the Garden. Again, Night at the Garden. A documentary film about maybe 10, 15 minutes long. It was made back in 2018, 2019. A rally held in New York City in 1939, right before he got involved in World War II, where American Nazis are marching in Madison Square Garden. They're carrying the American flag with big banners of George Washington with swastikas on either side of him. So the main founding father, flanked by swastikas, and they're holding an American flag, and of course they are railing against Jews and black people, anybody else not acceptable to them. So when the symbols of democracy, that is our flag and the founding fathers, get conflated image-wise with this kind of thing, at what point do you separate the wet from the water? At some point, you bombard the mind, it all becomes one thing. And then there's this. On August 7th, 1930, in Marion, Indiana. I'm not going to show the whole thing. You can just see right here. There are 2 dead bodies in the tree above these people. One is named A. Smith, the other one's name is Tommy Shipp. There should have been a 3rd man up there named James Cameron, but to my knowledge, he's the only man to have escaped a lynching in American history. Tommy Smith and A. Shipp were in jail under suspicion of committing some crimes. The mob came and got them. There's a man across the street. Now, ironically enough, the tree they're hanging from, the tree they're hanging from is right outside the courthouse. You know, the Hall of Justice? So the Hall of Justice right here, they came to the courthouse, dragged these men out, put them up in a tree, and again, we see that there are people who are looking to the eye of the camera, absolutely not bothered by it. They know that no one's going to even come and question them. They're absolutely certain, they are convinced, they're confident, and they're not wrong either. No one's going to come and bother them. No one's going to come and even suspect them of anything. They're at the scene of a double homicide, and they look like they're gathered for a family photo at a reunion. There's young and old, so it's not a matter of age. There's men and women, so it's not that one gender is more evil or wicked or meaner than the other one. They're from all stripes of background. They seem to be having a rather good time, like, you know, it's the county fair. They're at the scene of a double homicide, and no one looks worried. And again, I ask the question, how is that? Why is that? How is it so normal that they can go to this happening and not think that this is something a little bit awry for the American democracy? This guy pointing up is what always intrigues me. It's almost like you say, like, be sure you get me. You see, I don't know about you, but when I saw what happened on January 6, 2021, with this knowledge of history, these kind of things happening all the time, when people were saying, well, how can this be happening? My question was, well, given our history, the more appropriate question is, how could it not happen? It's just the latest inflection point of a series of things like this that's been happening all along. It's not new. It's just that now the assault was on the Capitol itself, not just a random lynching somewhere out there in the middle of America. Where a mob gathers to take the law into their hands, Ace of the Tommy Shipp was supposed to be subject to the rules of justice, rule of law. Everyone equal before the law, no one above the law. They're supposed to have their day in court. First Amendment, Second Amendment, all those things applying to them as American citizens, these people who live in America. The crowd didn't like the result. So they took the matters into their own hand and killed them. January 6th, they didn't like the result, so they decided to storm the Capitol and change the results. If you look at that map, you see Oklahoma. We don't have enough time to go through all this. I don't want to take the time to go through all this. But Oklahoma in 1920, 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma, black people, the Greenwood District was bombed, burned, and pillaged out of existence. In 1913, Rosewood in Florida, completely wiped off the map, gone. There were race riots in East St. Louis in 1916. There were race riots in 1917. Chicago race riots in 1919. This happened again and again and again and again. And in each instance, just like Kristallnacht in 1938, the cops stood around and did nothing, and citizens looked at it and went, well, what do you know? When a community of people is pounced upon like that, and the institutional levers of authority don't come to their rescue, then you have to reinterpret what you understand to be those institutional levers of authority. That means that the police are there for doing a lot of stuff, but they're not protecting and serving, at least not you. And people understand that they're there because they're to protect people, but not your community, which means your community is left open and vulnerable. That means if you're an Italian immigrant, or depending on what part of Michigan or the South you're in, if you're a Catholic, if you're the wrong kind of person, they too can come against you as well. This comes, I believe, from a tradition of violence. That is, people that feel that, barring all other methodologies, they'll use violence like that. So they're prone to use violence, they're quick to use violence, They'll use it because they're entitled to tyranny. They feel entitled to tyranny. In other words, they feel entitled to just ignore the law whenever they feel like it. I don't like this result, so guess what? We take the law into my hands and do what we want. How can they feel like that? Because they have been guaranteed time and time again no consequences, a culture of impunity. Do you really think that there are not speed traps that people will obey the law on highways? Well, never mind. I know you would. I might be challenged. On June 13, 2005, the United States Senate finally got around to making an apology to this man right here, Dr. James Cameron. James Cameron was the third man that's supposed to be hanging in that tree where Ace from the Tommy ship in 1930. Now, Dr. Cameron passed away a few years ago, but he told the story like this. He said that when he was in that jail cell, when they dragged Abe and Tommy out, put those ropes around them, and then lynched them, he said he was in there sweating bullets. He said he prayed to God, please let these people understand he had nothing to do with what they were accusing him of doing. They dragged him out. Of course, they were beating him on the way up. They put the rope around his neck, dragged him outside. They were about to hoist him up in the tree. Now, Dr. Cameron said that he heard a voice that spoke to the mob and said, let that boy go. He had nothing to do with whatever it is you think he did. And he said it's like they were just dumbstruck. They backed off, let him go. He, of course, having good presence of mind, got out of there, running, not walking. There is another video on YouTube called The Third Man. The Third Man, you can see him tell a story. Senator Mary Landrieu in 2005, Democratic senator from Louisiana, and then Senator George Allen, Republican from Virginia, got together and decided to try and do something to address this long overdue issue of lynching in America, mob action that had been normalized. Normalized because it happened so often, and there was never anybody prosecuted, just like in Marion, Indiana, or Center, Texas. This happened over and over again. Tulsa was never prosecuted. Roseville was never prosecuted. Chicago was never prosecuted. East St. Louis was never prosecuted. You get whole communities that get pillaged, burned, and looted, and nobody ever goes to jail. How is that possible? Or, in the case of Tulsa, the people whose homes were burned, they were arrested and sent to jail because then people said they did it. So, denial you see before your own eyes. Willful denial. Well, Senator Allen and Senator Landrieu had both read a book entitled Without Sanctuary. Take a good look at this book. This book is a book of nothing but lynching photos. It is about this thick. Of nothing but lynching photos. No narration, no interpretation, just photos of lynchings. That thick, without sanctuary. They were so disturbed by what they saw in that book, the number of lynchings, that they finally brought Dr. Cameron to Washington to make a very too late apology from the Senate. Just bear with me as I read this. The Senate late Monday formally apologized for having rejected decades of pleas to make lynching a federal crime and scores of victims descendants watch from the chamber's galleries. On a voice vote, and without opposition, the Senate passed a resolution expressing its regrets to the relatives as well as to the nearly 5,000 Americans who are documented as having been lynched from 1880 to 1960. Can I put a fine point on this for you? By 1960, we had fought out one of the two world wars. 1960, that means we were 9 years away from putting men on the moon. That is, sending people from Earth a 250,000 miles across not some of the most, but the most hostile territory known to humanity to walk on another terrestrial body. Extraterrestrial body. We're going to do that 9 years later. And they just got around to doing this 9 years before. The deaths occurred without trials, so no due process. Mostly in the South, but not only in the South, because in 1921, 3 black men were lynched in Duluth, Minnesota, too. Often with the knowledge of local officials who allowed mob lynchings to become picture-taking public spectacles. In fact, Without Sanctuary, Leon F. Litwack, in his foreword to the book, says that oftentimes newspapers would run stories, so there's going to be a lynching on Thursday, they'll redirect train traffic and road traffic to the part. Children will be let out of schools early so they can attend the lynching. There are community events. How's it not going to be normalized when it's like that? Some 4,743 people were killed by mob violence. That included Italians, that included immigrants, that included Jews, but mostly black people. Between 1882 and 1968, according to Tuskegee University records, of those, nearly 3/4 were African Americans. Lynchings reached a peak of 230 in 1892. They were prevalent well into the 1930s. 20 lynchings were reported in 1935. During that time, nearly 200 anti-lynching bills. So there were people of conscience that said, we have to do something legislatively to stop this. 200 bills introduced in Congress. 3 passed the House. 7 presidents between 1890 and 1952 petitioned Congress to please stop this. Congress never acted on it. But the Senate, with Southern conservatives wielding their filibuster powers, refused to act. With the enactment of civil rights laws in the 1960s and changes to the national attitudes, the issue faded away. That is, they never resolved it. It just moved from the priority list down on the ladder. Such legislation would have made lynching a federal crime and allowed the U.S. government to prosecute those responsible, including local law enforcement officers. That is, those who stood by and did like this when lynchings were occurring. Senator Andrew gave Dr. Cameron, at this point is in his 90s, recognition. They let him speak. Dr. Cameron was very fragile at this point, very feeble, but he still had enough spirit inside of him to say a few things. He took them to task on that day for being so late to this urgent issue. The legacy with Dr. Cameron and those immigrants and those Jews and those Italians and the people that came from the wrong parts of Europe, what they dealt with, the legacy continued into the 21st century. For example, in 2020, a young black man named Ahmaud Arbery was running through a neighborhood in Georgia when 3 men just rolled up on him and shot him. They demanded to know, who are you? He said, why should I tell you? They got into a scuffle, shot. Again, go on YouTube and look at the trial of Ahmaud Arbery. His murderers, the day that they were sentenced, they weren't remorseful. They were utterly shocked. Wait a minute. You're really going to send me to jail for killing a black guy? Yes. Why? Because it's 2020, man. They were utterly surprised that they were going to jail for doing that. But before Ahmaud Arbery, before him, there was in 1999, Amadou Diallo in New York City. Because no, this is not just a Southern thing. Amadou Diallo, an immigrant in New York City, was shot 40 some odd times. He's in an apartment building. The New York City police said we're after a suspect, a black suspect. Well, he's black. They said, show me your ID. He went to pull his wallet out. They thought it was a gun. So they shot him 41 times. Coretta Scott King. Her husband shot down on August 4th, 1968. Another interesting thing about that is on August 3rd, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, always hate to America, just be true to what you said on paper. Just do what you said in your Constitution. We should take note of the fact this is before affirmative action, so he's not calling for affirmative action. Just do what you said on paper. Just follow the laws you wrote. It will be good. They shot him the next day. Gone. Before then, in 1955, Emmett Till, 14-year-old kid from Chicago, who was visiting his great uncle in Money, Mississippi. 2 men showed up at the house that night for he allegedly said something to a woman at a store he shouldn't have talked to. These 2 men come in, they drag Till out of his house. So first of all, they break and entering. Then they take him to an undisclosed location, kidnapping. Then they beat him and torture him. So breaking, entering, kidnapping, torture, then murder, putting a bullet in his head, tying a cotton gin fan around his neck, and throwing him into a river. And then, sometime later, to sit down and give a full-blown interview to William Bradford Huey, a very well-known journalist, and they say, yeah, we did it, so what? No one's going to come and get us, and guess what happened? No one came and got them. Now, when that kind of thing happens over and over and over again to the tune of thousands across 250 years, how are people on January 6th not going to think like, sure, we can do this and get away with it? Of course you can think that, because up to this point you have been. It also, by the way, to put even more specific, might be the thing that motivates some people to try to develop a plot to kidnap a governor of Michigan. Why? Because we think we can get away with it. It's violent, it's an appeal to tyranny, and it's a culture of impunity. Nothing will happen to us except something did happen. It's the legacy of the devil's handshake, which we're still dealing with. Now, when I was working as an undergrad student in Maryland at Bowie State College, I used to take the train downtown to Washington, D.C., and come up out of the tunnel, and I always would go and stand in front of the National Archives. I would just aspire to look at this saying on the front of the building, and it said this: eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. You want to be free? You can't afford to be asleep. Not a single second of any day, of any year, of any month, of any year. Because as we know, for those of you that have been in the military, thank you for your service, but you know that when you raise your right hand, you took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And folks, there are domestic enemies against the Constitution. They're there. They blew up the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. Back in the 1990s, Timothy McVeigh and his henchmen. They're there. In 1796, George Washington, in his farewell address, he warned, essentially saying, someday, someone may come along and try to use the tools of democracy to undo democracy. Abraham Lincoln, during the Civil War, said, no country could ever invade us and take us over. We have to do it ourselves from the inside. What did these men know that we are missing right now? Martin Niemöller, the great German theologian before World War II, Martin Niemöller, he wasn't really, a fan of the Nazis, but he didn't see what they were. They were going to become the problem that they became. So finally he was arrested. Now the story goes, this quote of his, some of you are probably familiar with this quote, and there are many different versions of it. But Martin Niemöller, this part is absolutely clear. For the rest of his life after World War II, Martin Niemöller lived convicted that he didn't do enough, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, to resist the Nazis when he had the chance. And for Dietrich Bonhoeffer, that was a great deal of moral turmoil, because here's a man that is supposed to be following a belief that says, thou shalt not kill, but he reached the point that Adolf Hitler had to be done away with to assassination. Highly moral man that's going to be involved in a murder plot. Tore Dietrich Bonhoeffer a lot apart. Martin Niemöller never got to that point because he was arrested by that regime. But after the war, he said, you know what? So the story goes, he said, when they came first for the communists, I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. And then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. And then they came for me. And by that time, no one was left to speak up. 2 Sundays ago in Holland, they had a forum in the community called the Soul of Politics. And I essentially took this and reinterpreted and said, now, let me speak for myself, and if I may, for my community. I said, I've always known they're coming for me, but now they're coming for you too. I've always known they're coming for me. That's never been a secret. But now they're coming for you too. The people, the enemies of democracy, they're coming for everybody. Now what are you going to do? Sitting on the side is not an option. They're coming. They're busy. They're busy. They're active. They're very dedicated to their cause. What are you going to do? Let's talk about it, shall we? Thanks.
All right. Important questions to consider tonight. Who'd like to ask the first question?
I was wondering if you could speak to the psychology of the mob violence, in the sense that there's no moral compass or no sense of right or wrong, either in the individual or in the group as a whole.
I cannot speak to the psychology, but I have a colleague at home. Mary and I talked about doing something, either an article or something that explores that. She's a psychologist, so I can look at it from a historical point of view, but I know that mob violence has been a part of American history from the very beginning. Back in the early republic, there's no such thing as a Michigan State Police Force. If you take, like, for example, the yellow fever outbreak in Philadelphia, 1793, or even smallpox outbreak. When smallpox outbreaks in small villages, the way people dealt with that, they said, you know what, your family's been affected, you gotta go. But I live here, so what? You're in danger of the rest of us, so the town will get together and say, you gotta go. So mob violence has been a reality in American history, but the psychology of it all, aside from a mob just having mob mentality, so it acts like a mob, beyond that, I need to talk to my psychologist colleague and fill in more details on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? I wanted to thank you for the book recommendations.
Sure.
Are there other readings that you can recommend for those of us who want to read more deeply on this topic?
There's a book entitled Lynching in the Heartland. That's one title. There's another book entitled White Allies by Drake Boyd, which looks at people like Abraham Heschel, a Hasidic Jew who marched with John Lewis in 1965 across the Independence Bridge. Let's see. There's an old standby. He's got some mileage on it now, but still a pretty good book called Black Like Me by the journalist. Had his skin darkened. He went down south, essentially being a black person, to see what it was really like, and he found out what it was really like. I'll think of some more, Carrie, and send those to you via email. Yes, sir. Or yes, ma'am. Ma'am, yes, sir.
Okay. Oh, I just have read a book recently about a woman, Ida B. Wells, who also spoke a lot about lynching and, was first in Memphis, was where she experienced it, and then she later moved to Chicago, but then she traveled.
They ran her out of
around
Memphis. Yes.
And then even to England there too.
Ida B. Wells was living in Memphis. She had a good male friend in Memphis who was running a grocery store in a certain neighborhood that would only sell food to black people. This is the conundrum, right? If everybody needs some place to live and clothes to wear, water to drink, and food to eat. So that just stopped being a reality just so people will sell it to you. So the guy opened up a grocery store that sold to black customers. And so he got so much business from the black community because that's where place they could go. He ended up actually making more money than the white owner of the grocery store that black folk used to go to, because they go there and be treated like dirt. They figure, like, spend more money here, be treated with indignity over here, be treated like a human being. They chose here. Well, the folk over here did not like the fact that they were being beat economically, so they murdered these guys, lynched them. And the excuse they used was, well, they're about to assault a white woman. Ida B. Wells made a direct appeal to white women saying, will you please tell the people to find some other excuse other than, wonderful you, stop killing people. So without intending to, she started writing about it for some editorial pieces. She became a self-taught journalist, and she was powerful. There's one story where Ida B. was riding on a train, and they went to throw her off the train. She went, I'm not getting off. I paid my money. They tried to throw her off. So she bit the hand of the guy that was trying to manhandle her. Then they threw her off the train. She took it to court. When the court case, she appealed it to the Supreme Court. She won. But then they reversed the decision. Then they ran her out of town to Chicago. She continued her advocacy. Ida B. Wells was nobody's plaything. She's a powerful woman, and she went on a one-woman crusade trying to stop lynching. She's worth reading about. I can't remember the name of her book. There's a biography that's been written by Ida B. Wells by, what's the title of it?
Crusade for Justice.
Crusade for Justice is the one. It's a wonderful book.
Actually, she wrote it.
Yes.
She wrote this, and it stops very when it ends. It's just suddenly in the middle of a sentence because she just passed away.
Yeah.
But then her daughter, her children or grandchildren kind of put this together and got it published.
Yeah.
I don't know how long ago it was first published.
But I believe that the historian Paula Giddings, who wrote When and Where I Enter, also wrote a biography on Ida B. Wells as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for that, though. Yes, sir.
Thank you. It was very interesting. I've learned a lot. I was wondering, what do you see the future since January 6th? Because, you don't hear that angle so much about January 6th, the Confederate flag. I mean, you see it on the news occasionally, but you don't hear, much connection to January 6th. It's more like, they want to just overthrow the country.
So you're asking me what about the future based on that?
Yes. What do you have any ideas?
Well, let me put it first off. Let me just, on a personal note, the thing there are many tragic things about January 6th, not least of which is that it was the first time since the Civil War. Of course, the Civil War was an obvious, anomaly in that the election came out a certain way and then half the country seceded, then we went to 4 years of warfare. But since the end of the Civil War, it's the first time that we've experienced the fact that there was no peaceful transfer of power. We can claim that among the world's democracies, among the world. We can't say that anymore. We've lost that. They robbed us of that. We could identify ourselves as a nation that had a nearly unbroken record of peaceful transfer of power for a free and fair election that people were disagreeing with. Some people would want to win, other people lost. They go back and do it 4 years later. We can't say that anymore. So we're just another country again right now. As far as how they're shaking out, it's not just January 6th, but the 14th Amendment that was passed after the Civil War specifically to address people that waged war on their government. I think it's section either paragraph 2 or 3 that was recently adjudicated, and they essentially neutered that, gutted it. So now you ask yourself, so then under what conditions then can someone be disqualified to try to overthrow a government from taking federal office again? Is there nothing that can be done? I mean, is everything on the table for what you could possibly do to threaten democracy and not be punished for it? So that part has happened. And so I'm trying to get my students in my Revolutionary American class to understand that there's a Constitution from 1787, the interpretations then, the Civil War and the changes with the Constitution after the Civil War, and then it's in full motion right now. I mean, this is not theoretical stuff. Civil War amendments are being adjudicated right now in the 21st century in a way that people never thought they would. But the founders and the post-Civil War generation, you should go back and read the amendments. Whereas in 1787, they were dancing around the slavery issue, calling it such persons. In 1865, 66, 67, they were not in the mood. There were a million Americans laying dead from Maine to California. So they said, neither slavery nor involuntary, they called it what it was, slavery. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall be allowed in this jurisdiction of the United States unless someone has been duly convicted of a crime. Now, they got around that, right? Saying, okay, so you can't have slavery. You can't force someone to be a slave against their will if they've been convicted of a crime. So what do? Pass laws guarantee you be convicted of a crime. You get convicted of a crime, go to jail for 30 days, get hooked up with what? 9 other people, hammer your hand, work on a railroad, it's called a chain gang. What's it called if you're being made to work against your will, not being paid? What's it called? Slavery. So the 14th Amendment was passed to address things like January 6th happening. They didn't happen. Now we're having discussions about, well, can a state, which is where elections take place, states conduct elections, and we used to agree that if Michigan conducted an election, that the results here, people just honor it in Washington, D.C. after it's all over with. We can't say that now. So the guardrails were there for a moment, and then the guardrails are proven to be very weak or have been swept aside. So what's the new paradigm? What's the new paradigm for our democracy? Now, while people are trying to answer that question, the people that are trying to undo this thing, they are developing a new paradigm, and that is to keep on hitting you with all kind of stuff and conspiracies and lies and overwhelming lies. And I'll put it to you like this, at that neighborhood forum I was telling you all about, I told this one lady, she said, I just can't believe, I wish people would stop saying that. I said, after everything you've seen over the last 8 years, what would it take for you to finally believe? How much more does it have to go before you finally, does the whole thing got to be swept aside before you finally believe, okay, it's a danger that's happening? If you look at that picture from August 7, 1930, I believe 2 dead bodies in a tree, and I don't care what you call it. You can have democracy. This whole stage can be democracy. But where A spent the time he shipwrecked in that night, right here, all around them was democracy. But where they lived in that community, they were living in a land of tyranny. Surrounded by sea democracy, but where they were, totalitarian reality. People go come into their neighborhood, string them up, and walk away and be good with it and sleep well at night. That's what happens with totalitarian countries, where citizens have the rule of law not working for them. So there's been this coexistential reality in America for a long time. We got to come to grips with. So when January 6th is going to fall, we had to do some basic things. First off, we had to agree that it happened. And when elected officials are actually saying that it didn't happen, that means we have more fundamental discussions that we have to have called truth. We got to agree upon that first. Did you really see what happened happen? We can agree there. Then maybe we can start having something about a discussion about solutions to it, to prevent it from happening again. There's a book. Some of you know about the author Herman Wouk, who wrote The Winston War and Warm Remembers. And in book 2, Herman Wouk introduces a character in Armin von, a German field marshal, who's being questioned, I think, for the end of World War II during the Nuremberg war crimes trials. And General von Roon is talking, and he says, so why didn't the Jews leave Germany when it became clearly apparent to them that life was going to get harder before it got better? After November 9th and 10th, 1938, after Kristallnacht, you could not miss the fact they're burning synagogues, plundered homes and businesses. Life was going to get egregiously hard. This is 5 years after Dachau opened up. Buchenwald and all the rest of them are about to go online. Life is going to get real. And so they asked him, why didn't they leave? And von Roon says, it was the will to not believe. They simply just convinced themselves that it wasn't as bad as they thought it was, even though they were looking, just like you and I looking at each other, that even though they can see that, they just chose to say, well, it's something else. Why? Because historically, people came along and roughed them up a little bit, then they got what they wanted, got in office, then went away and left them alone, and life went back to normal. They figured this is just another one of those things. It wasn't. This time it was different. So no, he'll come along, do what he wants, then he'll go away. No, he won't. No, he won't. No, he didn't. So I think what's happening right now, I thought about that a lot. That a lot of people are suffering from the will to not believe. I saw what I saw. They saw it too. How are we seeing two different things? Doesn't mean you have to agree with me. I'm just wondering, how did you not see the Capitol getting stormed and you arrived at a completely, not just a different interpretation, but a completely different interpretation? Cops being beat up. Some committed suicide. Some having wounds and damages they're never going to get over. How did you reach such a completely different interpretation on that when the whole world saw it? What does that mean for our democracy? What does it mean for democracies? So looking at things like what's going on in Ukraine right now. People, like it or not, we are the indispensable nation. And Ellen Sirleaf Johnson was interviewed recently. She said that people around the world look to us to find out what we're going to do. Our democracy is a bellwether. We need to take care of it. We need to nurture it and care for it better. Yes?
Well, I know one thing I hear occasionally on discussion about January 6th as well. There were riots in Oregon, I think it was Oregon, around that year or the year before. Mm-hmm. There was all kinds of violence. So, they said their government let that happen. So what's different about January 6th?
Let me tell you what's different. I also teach a class on the Civil War up at the Muskegon Correctional Facility. So these men are felons. They're prisoners, right? They're in prison. And sometimes my students say to me, well, what are they in there for? I said, well, first off, we don't talk about that. It's inappropriate. These men are they're a vulnerable population. They're getting education. They sign up for these classes. They're trying to do something with their lives inside here so that when they get released, they'll have something to start working with to rebuild their lives. I said, but you know, I don't know what they did to get in there. I can tell you one thing they didn't do. They're not guilty of trying to overthrow the government. What they're in there for is not that. So that's a false equivalency, first of all. You can have riots. There are riots and no one's condoning riots in Oregon or Washington, Seattle. So a riot is a riot, and we should condemn it all. But there's rioting, then it's trying to overthrow the government. A coup d'etat. They're similar but different. People that make that argument are part of the problem. It's a specious argument, and it's completely disingenuous from the fact that some people tried to stop a free and fair election, period. It's that simple. Thank you.
Last question. Thank you very much for coming this evening.
You're welcome.
What does eternal vigilance look like to you?
First off, it means teaching history in schools. It means teaching political science. It means teaching English and languages. It means helping people understand. It means reintroducing or beefing up civics classes in K through 12. It means helping people understand the government is not an autopilot, that you actually do have to tend to it and get involved in it. It means understanding that, just like the oath of office says, that there are enemies against democracy, this Republican democracy, foreign and domestic. And it means doing exactly what it says, watching every day, being aware that just because it is this way doesn't mean it has to be this way. Okay? Because as mentioned with Marion, Indiana, that happened while this was a functioning democracy too. People were being lynched in extra legal lynchings. There's non-legal lynchings where actual murders are being occurred, and law enforcement is doing nothing because the politicians are doing nothing because they don't think it's important enough to protect those citizens over there. So I don't care what you call it. When those citizens over there can be lynched with impunity, that's not democracy for them. And it gets to be very simple. It either works for everybody or it's working for nobody. And if it's not working for them over there, again, I ask the question, how soon before over there gets over here to where you are? There's a problem. So eternal vigilance means eternally, day and night, every day, every second of every day, watching it, paying attention to what's happening in government, doing what people used to do, writing your congressman, writing your senator, and holding their feet to the fire. And look, it doesn't necessarily mean you agreeing with me. In fact, it's probably better if you don't agree with me. But it does mean that we have a civil discourse and work together to make it a strong Republican democracy. I'll say this last thing, then we can go home. I teach a class called Race and Ethnicity in America. Right? I tell my students, I told my white students, Hope is a predominantly white institution. So I tell my white students, if they come into the class, they sign up and they want to find out what's this whole race thing in American history. So I told them, I said, look, what I need you to do, first day of class, I said, I need you to park, if you come in here with guilt and anxiety, park it outside the door. I tell my students to come in, if you come in here with resentment and hostility, park it outside the door. Only one in here who has the right to be mad is me, because I got to read y'all's papers. I tell them because guilt and anxiety, hostility and resentment both get in the way of me doing my job as a historian, which is to get you the information you don't know. The information you don't know is what, if we can set the table and not get involved in the Pen Olympics, that is, who suffer more, the Native Americans or the Irish Catholics or the black people or, the Italian immigrants or these people or the Jews. I don't care who it is. It's America. None of it should happen. Let's just agree on that. We're going to get to that common through line as a common denominator. We can sit down and talk about this and reach a solution in a uniquely American way, once and for all, on the issue of race. First of all, learning to talk about it, confronting it, and not denying your story and not vilifying this person over here, but coming together at the table and sitting down talking about this. And then, once we know everything, because being eternally vigilant means being fully informed. Doing that first. So no more book banning. Being fully informed. And then having honest discussions about it. Then we can move forward.
Thank you.
And that's all I'll say about that.
So I hope you all join us in the reception in the Clark. I'll be bringing Fred there in just a minute. So let's meet there and continue the conversation. Thank you so much.